Canada is at a crossroads. For decades, our defense has leaned heavily on one ally, the United States. But today, whispers in Ottawa are growing louder. What if Canada begins to break free from that reliance? What if the future of our defense lies not in Washington, but in Europe? Tonight, we unravel a story that could reshape Canada's military identity, its alliances, and its role on the world stage. For as long as most Canadians can remember, our country's security has been intertwined with the United States. From the NORAD alliance to joint procurement projects, we've often looked south of the border for our military hardware and support. Fighter jets, surveillance systems, naval technology, the U.S. has been the go-to supplier. But the tides are shifting. A new debate is emerging in Ottawa, one that questions whether Canada has become too dependent on Washington. And behind closed doors, government officials are exploring options that would once have seemed unthinkable. Sourcing defense equipment from Europe. What does this mean for Canada? Could this signal the beginning of a new era in Canadian defense strategy, or is it simply political posturing in response to U.S. tariffs and shifting global alliances? Tonight, we dive deep into the forces driving this debate, the reactions from politicians and military leaders, and what it means for Canada's place in the world. To understand why Canada is even considering Europe as a serious defense partner, we need to look at the context. First, there's the issue of cost. U.S. defense technology is powerful but notoriously expensive. The F-35 fighter jet program, for example, has ballooned into one of the most costly defense projects in history. Canada has committed to purchasing 88 F-35s, but critics argue the price tag will weigh down the defense budget for years to come. Second, there's politics. The U.S. has used defense sales not only as a commercial transaction but as leverage. Canada has often been pressured to align its foreign policy with Washington in exchange for favorable defense deals. With the rise of tariffs on Canadian goods and tensions over trade, many in Ottawa are asking, should our national security be tied so closely to a partner that sometimes treats us more like a competitor than an ally? And finally, there's innovation. European suppliers, from Germany's submarine manufacturers to Sweden's renowned Saab aircraft, are offering competitive, cost-efficient, and increasingly advanced options. For the first time in decades, Canada is openly evaluating whether its defense future could include a European pivot. In recent months, quiet but significant steps have been taken inside Ottawa. Defense committees have begun holding briefings with European manufacturers, exploring alternative procurement options that bypass U.S. suppliers. One of the loudest signals came when Canadian officials attended the Munich Security Conference earlier this year. Sources suggest Canadian representatives were not only engaging in diplomacy, they were inquiring about possible partnerships with European defense firms. Germany, Sweden, France, and even the UK were on the list. What does this mean? For the first time in decades, Canada is showing serious interest in diversifying its defense suppliers. Not just as a bargaining chip with Washington, but as a potential long-term strategy. Take fighter jets as an example. While Canada has already committed to the F-35, debate hasn't stopped. A growing chorus of defense analysts argue Canada could have saved billions, and gained more independence, by choosing European aircraft like the Saab Gripen or the Eurofighter Typhoon. These jets are not only cheaper, they're designed with interoperability in mind, capable of integrating into NATO systems without locking Canada into an American-only supply chain. Critics argue the F-35 deal was less about what was best for Canada, and more about keeping Washington happy. So the Gripen and Typhoon debates have become symbols of a broader conversation. Should Canada put its sovereignty ahead of U.S. approval? And it's not just about jets. Canada's naval procurement is another flashpoint. Our submarine fleet is aging, outdated, and plagued with maintenance issues. For years, experts have warned that Canada risks losing its underwater capability altogether. Enter Europe. Nations like Germany, Spain, and Norway are global leaders in building advanced, diesel-electric submarines, smaller, quieter, and more cost-efficient than the nuclear giants the U.S. favors. Insiders say Ottawa is exploring these European options more seriously than ever before. Because here's the reality, if Canada buys American subs, it inherits American priorities. But if Canada turns to Europe, it buys not just machines, it buys independence. Of course, politics is never far behind. Prime Minister Mark Carney has been cautious, framing the discussions as routine exploration. But his language is noticeably different from past leaders who automatically defaulted to U.S. partnerships. Meanwhile, opposition parties are sharpening their blades. Conservatives argue that flirting with European suppliers sends the wrong message to our closest ally. The Bloc Québécois, however, supports the idea, claiming it strengthens Canada's independence. And the NDP? They see it as a potential opportunity to create Canadian jobs, if Ottawa pairs procurement with domestic manufacturing deals. The debate is heating up. But beneath the talking points, one reality remains. For the first time in generations, Ottawa is openly questioning whether Canada can, or should, depend so heavily on Washington for its defense. Keep relying on the United States for its defense? And the mood changes dramatically. A recent poll suggests that more than half of Canadians believe the country is too dependent on Washington. Many point to Donald Trump's America First policies as a wake-up call. If the U.S. puts its own interests first, why shouldn't Canada? On social media, hashtags like #BuyCanadianDefense and #StandStrongCanada have begun trending, fueled by citizens demanding that Canadian tax dollars stay closer to home, or at least away from automatic U.S. contracts. The sentiment is clear: Canadians want sovereignty, not subservience. But what about the people in uniform, the ones whose lives depend on the equipment Ottawa buys? Here, the picture is more complicated. Senior military officers quietly caution that moving away from U.S. suppliers could complicate interoperability. Canada's armed forces train alongside Americans, share intelligence with Americans, and often deploy under U.S.-led missions. If Canada suddenly switches to European gear, could it create gaps in coordination? At the same time, many rank-and-file soldiers see benefits. European systems like the Gripen fighter or German submarines are not only reliable, they're often easier to maintain and cheaper to operate. Some even argue that relying less on American equipment could give Canada more flexibility in missions, reducing the perception that Canadian troops are merely extensions of U.S. power. In other words, within the military itself, there's a split: align closely with Washington for maximum integration, or diversify for maximum independence. Then there's the economic angle, and it may be the most powerful driver of all. Canadian defense contracts are worth billions. Every time Ottawa chooses a foreign supplier, jobs are at stake. Aerospace workers in Quebec, shipbuilders in Nova Scotia, and tech firms in Ontario all want a piece of the pie. This is why the push for European suppliers is often linked to a second demand: local production. If Canada buys Gripen jets, why not build part of them here? If we order German submarines, why not assemble them in Halifax shipyards? Industry groups argue that such deals could supercharge Canada's manufacturing sector, creating thousands of skilled jobs while reducing reliance on imports. But critics warn of risks. Will European firms really agree to transfer enough technology and production to make it worthwhile? Or will Canada simply trade one form of dependency for another? So here's the clash. Politicians weighing sovereignty against alliances. Military leaders balancing interoperability against independence. Workers and industries hoping for contracts, but fearing broken promises. And Canadians at home asking the simplest, hardest question: who really protects us? The debate is no longer confined to defense committees or secret memos. It is spilling into living rooms, workplaces, and election campaigns. And for the first time in decades, Canadians are asking not just how much to spend on defense, but who to spend it with. You've been watching Canada Nowline News, your source for Canada's politics, economy, and world affairs. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, make sure to follow our channel and hit subscribe. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you'll never miss a story that matters to Canadians.